Hey everybody, we're back again, this time moving to East Asia. Need to learn a little bit about Japan up through the Middle Ages and also a little bit about who the Mongols were. So first we need to start with the importance of geography when talking about ancient Japanese culture. Here's a map that shows Japan as we know it, the modern day state, off of the mainland of Asia. And so, somewhat similar to the Greeks when we talked about the importance of topography, the land itself, and how it kind of shaped that culture, the same is certainly true for the Japanese. Lying as they are on a series of islands off the mainland of Asia, what we're going to see is for the very earliest peoples living on these islands after the Neolithic Revolution, theirs will be a struggle to kind of keep up technologically with other areas of the world because they are in a position of relative isolation on this island chain. So, for example, when we talk about a Japanese culture, we talk about two major outside forces that will come into the islands and will bring their superior weapons technology, materials culture with them. So, for example, the first major push from an outside force was peoples from the Korean Peninsula in the 3rd century BC. When they came over to the islands almost overnight, they brought all their technological advances with them and gave the Japanese people a technological boost forward. They transformed the then Stone Age culture of the Japanese peoples into a metalworking culture. They taught them metalworking. They introduced how to grow rice to the Japanese islands. They will introduce the potter's wheel for making pottery to store food and beverages. And so this will be very important. The second great push in Japanese history was contact with the mainland of China from about 200 AD onwards. And when you talk about cultures that really shape early Japan, it is China. The Japanese will learn so much from the Chinese, which will exist at that time as a much more dominant civilization militarily, and they in fact will kind of subjugate the Japanese peoples. But during this process, during their centuries-long exposure with China, they will learn textile production, they will learn glass making, the philosophies of Taoism and also Buddhism will make their way from the mainland of Asia to the Japanese islands. So some pretty significant advancements. Also, if you'll notice here, I have a character set listed here as well. The Japanese, their first written character set will be based upon the Chinese character set. So in so many different ways, Japanese culture was truly shaped by Chinese culture over time. Now, one big difference will be the political situation of early Japan versus that of China during the same time period. What I have here on the screen is what I like to refer to as sort of a power pyramid, and you'll notice that it is inverted. You'll notice that the Uji, various clans that are in control of certain valleys, certain regions of the Japanese mainland, these clans and their chieftains were very warlike peoples, and they were constantly at war with one another to try and take resources, to try and claim greater political and military leadership. These guys are in control. They do not owe their land or allegiance to any one king, unlike our discussion of feudalism, for instance, in medieval Europe. These guys are doing it all by themselves, and they will jealously guard their land and their power and prestige. And so what you have is essentially a system that is very chaotic in early Japan, constant bloodshed, and the only figure that they all respect, not politically though, and not militarily, but the only figure that they all respect is the figure of the Japanese emperor. He holds religious power only, as he is believed to be a descendant of Amaterasu, the sun goddess, and his family is thought to hold religious significance. But when it comes to waging war, making alliances, what have you, he has no say in any of that. So Japan's early political history is very scattered, like I said, very chaotic. It will take the work of several individuals to begin trying to hammer out a central government in Japan. And even then, this process will continue to unfold over many centuries through constant warfare. Shotoku Tahi is one of these early individuals who, by marrying into the emperor's family, will gain at least a foothold on power. Everyone respects the emperor in a religious sense, so Tahi, by marrying into the emperor's family, manages to kind of distinguish himself from many of these other clan leaders during the period. And he sees a need for one centralized government. And here we go again with the Chinese influence on early Japan. Their first constitution or written body of laws in Japan, the 17-article constitution, will be based directly upon the Chinese model and will emphasize Confucian principles such as virtue or concord or harmony, trying to calm down all the infighting amongst the clan leaders. The constitution also included articles emphasizing the supremacy of the imperial throne and basically trying to get these clan leaders to willingly lay aside their differences. Tahi is also remembered for encouraging Buddhism to take root in Japan. He encouraged the work of a number of Buddhist missionaries and helped oversee the construction of several Buddhist temples over time. The next major figure that will have to sort of claw his way to power will be Nakatomi no Kamatari, the first of what will become known as the Fujiwara clan, who will assume leadership over a pretty broad area, but even then not the entirety of the islands. Kamatari will be one of these clan leaders who will sort of fight his way into power. And he too will become very close with the existing emperor at that point in time. And by doing so, Emperor Tenji, and by doing so, he will sort of use the imperial throne, the emperor's power, to get the attention of all these warring factions. And in 646 AD, we'll see the Taika Reforms instituted, which will try to, again, calm down the infighting amongst the nobility or these clan chiefs. We'll also see the Taika Reforms will include a mandate for the construction of a road network throughout this very rugged terrain across the islands. And also, it will eliminate private land ownership. This is important. The Taika Reforms will essentially get many of these parties involved to agree that the emperor, who before had only really been considered, sort of a religious figurehead, that everyone should acknowledge the power of the emperor, and in fact they should cede or give their land, not physically, but kind of in a memorial sense, should acknowledge that all power and land actually belong to the emperor. And Kamatari did this, and you can imagine there was a lot of speculation over why he was doing this, but he's doing this really for his own best interest. Just as he had fought his way to a position of power, he knew that there was someone else that would love to take that power away from him. So he gets many members of the nobility to agree to these reforms, and he says, look, I'm doing the same thing as you. I'm giving up my claim to my ancestral lands. See, it's not that big a deal. All right, so the Taika Reforms will not result in these members of the nobility losing their lands. They still get to live on their lands and all that. But it now gives the position of emperor, and more particularly the man behind the emperor, like Kamatari, gives them the ability to now strip the land of any clan chief that won't sit down and be good. All right, so it fundamentally shifts this power pyramid. Now, instead of the clan leaders being at the top and ruling everything, you see that pyramid has now changed. What you see here is the establishment of a shogunate system. The shogun is the person ruling from behind the emperor. The emperor still at this point in time is the ultimate religious authority. He does not exercise day-to-day control in Japan, but it will be the shogun, for example, Kamatari, who we just mentioned. He's the man kind of ruling from behind the emperor's throne. And he is the one who has true power, the one who has military and political control. And then only underneath him now will be the feudal lords, right? The clan leaders of the Uji, the daimyo as they become known. Look how they are now beneath the position of shogun. And then the peasants, and then the merchants. So this is a fundamental shift in the political system, the establishment of a shogunate system in which the shogun is the man who is calling all the shots now in Japan. Not to say that this will calm things down. There will still be tremendous jockeying for power, lots of bloodshed, it's still not going to ensure peace and quiet in Japan for some period of time, but it is an interesting development. What we're also going to see is during the so-called Heian period, between the late 8th and the 12th century, we will start to see the centralized government developing, an imperial government developing, and a push among successive leaders to begin closing the door, symbolically speaking, sort of closing the door between Japan and China now. The fear is that if they don't begin sort of severing ties of trade and not allowing, as many Chinese to come visit the mainland, that they will simply be overwhelmed, that there will not be a unique Japanese culture, that it instead will just be merely a pale imitation of Chinese culture. So we're going to begin to see Japanese leaders during the medieval period slowly beginning to sort of cut themselves off, not only from China, but from many other powers as well during the period. The result of this is that we will begin to see uniquely Japanese culture developing during the Heian period. Development of a uniquely Japanese written language and spoken language now, not just modeled off of the Chinese language. Haiku poetry, which I'm sure you've all had to take a stab at in your middle school and high school English classes. Also, the world's first novel, The Tale of Genji, was composed by a Japanese noblewoman during the 11th century, Murasaki Shikibu. So we are beginning to see new painting styles, new ceramics styles that are uniquely Japanese during the Heian period. Also, something that is particularly Japanese is the faith known as Shinto or Shintoism. And it is a native Japanese religion that, kind of like Hinduism in the Indian subcontinent, simply evolved organically over probably thousands of years. You would call it sort of a polytheistic faith in which there were a wide array of kami, or gods or spirits, that were believed to inhabit the natural world. These are the objects of veneration and prayer. And so Shintoism is kind of a very diffuse belief system. There is no concept of original sin. There is no concept in Shintoism, as there are in some other religions, that people are bad. Instead, Shinto belief kind of emphasizes virtuous behavior and also honoring the gods through ritual ceremonies, visiting temples, and having a close connection with the natural world around you. Now, moving on back to the Asian mainland, we need to say a few words about Mongol society. The Mongols were one among a number of nomadic polytheistic peoples that were living in sort of the high desert areas, sometimes referred to as the steppes of what is now northern China. You can see this modern-day map in the region of Mongolia today. That is really where they came from. And for these peoples, they're living in an incredibly harsh environment. It is high, cold desert. You cannot make a go of it through agriculture. So these people are often on horseback. They are very mobile on horseback. They can range to get what they need. They are pasturing animals. And oftentimes these folks are at war with one another. That is until we see the rise of a very persuasive and quite brutal Mongol leader by the name of Chinggis Khan. Actually, his given name was Temujin, but once he becomes leader of the Mongols, he is given the title Chinggis Khan, or universal ruler. And for him, he is going to run a very tight ship, so to speak. He will establish, with a relatively small army, he's going to establish a fearsome fighting force, one that is highly mobile on horseback, one that will use the element of surprise or guerrilla warfare against his enemies. He loved, for example, to fight during the winter time when most people were not ready to fight. That's when he's going to do his most damage. The Mongols were brutal against their enemies. They used what we'd call terrorist tactics today to try and force those that might raise a hand against them to simply give in rather than face the wrath of the Mongols. So through some of these innovative techniques, the fact that they could cover a lot of territory on horseback very, very quickly, strike quickly and with overwhelming numbers, they conquered a tremendous amount of territory. You can see, for example, on the map that shows first starts with Genghis Khan, then amongst his successors moving out, and ultimately will end up taking over China. and establishing the Yuan Empire, which will last for almost 100 years under Kublai Khan, who was the grandson of Chinggis Khan. Ultimately, though, they were not able to hold on to these territories. They're great at conquering, but not so good at managing these regions.